So we're going to speak for a little while, and then I'll open it to you guys. So we're going to talk about your business, your technology, and all those things. But before that, this is as much a data and big data event as it is an entrepreneurial event. So I'm kind of interested in just your entrepreneurial story. What you did before and how you came to do this. Maybe starting with you, Josh.
Sure. Well, I actually started here in New York a long time ago. I was actually in D.C. My friend Jack Hittery, some of you might know, got involved starting an early internet company called EarthWeb, and started up building websites. We always became more of a technology company, and ultimately we bought a very small IT job board called Dice.com, and that ended up becoming the future of the company. And it's now Dice's own independent public company, and it's kind of sold off the content assets. And I went out to California. I did a JD MBA. And spent very little time actually on the law side previous to this company, but I really went back and forth between venture capital and entrepreneurship. So I was at Redpoint Ventures, big firm, went back to a company for 4 years, started my own seed fund, and then they recruited me. This company, because it's obviously a good fit because it had the kind of legal background as well as the kind of business background, and they asked me to come as interim CEO and then stuck around. So I've been there about 18 months now.
So Nick, I understand you had an interesting initial funding strategy.
Yeah. I'll walk through a little bit before that. As far as my entrepreneurial background, I've always been that guy who was running lemonade stands when he was 5 years old, and then syndicating other people in that neighborhood to also run lemonade stands and collecting profit from everybody.
On lemonade.
Yeah. I cornered the market in Western Pennsylvania, believe me. So as far as my background, I graduated from Carnegie Mellon computer science. I made the fortunate decision at the time to go big tech right after I graduated. I was at Yahoo for about 2 years, and then being in the Valley like I was, just couldn't ignore all the startups that were going on. So I joined a company called SpunCell, which is an ad tech company, which is making me very happy right now as far as my options. Then I moved back to New York and just kind of kicked around a couple different startups, most notably Work Market, which is Union Square Ventures company. But as far as Numberfire, this is an idea I've had for many, many years, being an obvious sports fan like I am. I was, but the story specifically you're referring to, I was on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire with Regis Philbin about 2.5 years ago. I ended up winning $100,000 on the show, and I promptly quit my job and did Numberfire. I spent about 4 months, 4 or 5 months in my apartment at the time in West Village, sleeping 2 hours a day, getting just bulk shipments of Red Bull in, and I spent 4 months just building it, and ever since then it's been kind of an uphill ride. So I recommend, if any of you are looking for seed funding, apply to game shows.
It's a new playbook.
Yeah, it's brilliant. No equity, and there you go.
This is actually my, as I mentioned, I think before, this is my 4th startup company. So I've been doing that basically since I was 20 years old. First one was in gaming. I was young. So that's the initial idea I think that every nerd gets at that age. Then into mobile back in 2000. Did a search company that was sold off for quite a nice profit up in Scandinavia in 2006. Ended up working for a telco. They were the acquirer. We were kind of acquired by a local directory services company. Turned out I'm unemployable, as it's called. So I had to go out and start another one. So then I kind of got back to my met up with my co-founder of Data Market. We'd been actually kicking this idea about we'd been kicking this problem that I just explained around probably since about 2000. For our own sakes, in writing the different business plans and trying to kind of come up with, with support for our projections and so on. So we'd never kind of really found out how we wanted to do it, but then we started kicking the tires on that. So gone through some angel funding and a seed round, and building it out, going quite well actually.
Cool. Christopher Alberg, and I did research on data visualization in the early 90s, became Spotfire in 1996, I think. We built our company until it became fairly big, and we sold it to TIBCO in 2007, so it was a sort of a fun ride to take one's thesis and make it a company. and then stayed on there for a bit, and then sort of started smelling this idea that instead of working with numerical data that we'd done with Spotfire and Visualize That, again, what would happen if we could build the same sort of interactive graphical experience, but bolted right onto the web, and that's what we set out to do. So.
Very cool, thanks. So, one topic that I'm always interested in, obviously we're all big believers in big data here, the promise of it. At the same time, there seems to be a little bit of a gap between the excitement in the startup world and the VC world, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, the people that actually are likely customers for those technologies. So in your specific verticals, where do you think the market is in terms of people being ready to actually purchase your vertical solutions? Again, I mean, we don't have to do this. Whoever wants to start first.
I think it's interesting. There's clearly been like a whole series of fundings of companies who are building databases of various sorts, obviously. You all know that. And it's pretty amazing. And you'd want to say that it's sort of done, but it's probably not done. There will probably be N more before it's all said and done. And so that's pretty amazing. Then when it comes to vertical, I think it's pretty much every problem is up for grabs. You just got to do it really well. Call it big data or not, that may matter less. There is in some cases, but whether it's small or big doesn't really matter. But analytics can make a difference in pretty much every single application, I think. And that's just go at it.
So absolutely, and less so in terms of entrepreneurial opportunity, but in terms of when you actually go out and sell. So you sell to finance and government. So when you talk to finance folks or when you talk to government folks and you present your solution, which is very which is fascinating, but also very sort of forward thinking. What's the level of readiness? Do they just look at you as it's interesting, maybe we do a pilot in 2013 for it, or where are they in the cycle?
It's easy. We just walk in through the door and they give us millions of dollars. It's that easy. No, hey, everybody struggles with these sort of things, of course. Or if you don't, let me know how you do it. So we worked through our sort of pains in doing it, but we found in this sort of like dealing with risk and dangers that we found a whole bunch of, but first started in the government and did really well with that, and it's taken long. It's the government, but it's coming along really nicely. It now added some, really big companies, if you want to call them that, that in the commercial world where we've sort of been able to take the same patterns and apply it to commercial world. And it comes back to, look, solve somebody's problem. Somebody has a problem. Don't try to invent the problem for them, because that's always very hard. I've done plenty of that in my life. Invent people's problems and try to convince them that they have their problem. Instead, find their problem and actually solve it. I think it's as simple as that. It's amazing how I had to remind myself 900 times of that. But so what it is.
It kind of boils down to a lot of ways is, like when you're on these sales calls or, when you're meeting someone, it's how you phrase the message. Like I can't go into a meeting with ESPN or the NFL and go into like how cool Hadoop is or, how much I love R or something like that. You really got to phrase it in a way that like delivers like a very valuable value prop to them, and like for me in the sports world, with Moneyball and with sabermetrics, it actually is relatively far along as far as the vertical goes, at least in comparison to a government or something like that. So it's not like I have to go in just kind of explain to them why analytics are important, but it's also very critical to sort of like understand that when we're up here or in this room, it's easy for me to talk one way about what I'm doing. But if I'm in a meeting with business people or marketing people, it's very important to keep very, very focused on the value prop and how what I can do can very specifically help their business. It's really just a matter of kind of understanding your audience and how to market it.
Josh, are lawyers ready to buy big data?
Well, I'd say, so a lot of people tell us we're crazy. Like, hey, most lawyers went to law school to avoid data, right? And now you're trying to sell data to lawyers. I think a couple things, though, was interesting. One is, we did have a lot of big companies fund the initial academic work because of this rising, problem and kind of patent monetization entities, and so there was an eagerness to kind of understand a little bit of what's going on. The other thing is we initially did in selling to lawyers, especially law firm partners who are not familiar with latest in data science, is we sell history, right? So it's like we're not selling data prediction or predictive, we're selling history, right? This would happen in the past, which you may want to know may help you decide what's going to happen in the future. So that's really kind of what we had to start to do. But I do think there is a new generation, especially younger generation of partners at firms that are more open to this. But we still walk into some places and get blank stares.
Yeah. I think actually, I'd second what most people have said here in one form or another. Nobody is selling big data solutions. We're selling solutions that use big data kind of technologies, and you have to frame that differently for kind of, depending on who you're talking to. So in our case, we actually believe we've solved a pretty damn hard problem in kind of normalizing all these sources and getting that out there. But that's not what we kind of go out and tell people. Most people will kind of go, what's normalizing? We go in and everybody knows, every organization has a problem with the secondary data, with the market intelligence that they're taking in. So we try to frame it when we go to a typical organization. We try to frame it like we're trying to do for your market intelligence what Salesforce has done for your CRM, or something like that relates to it, in some way that they can actually, that they can find. Like Google for Numbers has also kind of done wonders for us to kind of explain on a high level what it is. We don't talk about technology. We don't talk about big data, and that's, big data isn't a sector. Big data is in every sector.
Okay, great, thanks. So since this is largely a technology audience, so let's actually talk about your product. And so at a high level, how some of you mentioned a little bit about it, but how does that work? What's the stack? I don't know, are you like Hadoop users? How does it work behind the scenes? How do you compute and process large amounts of data and provide the insights? Whoever wants to go first.
I can go. So we're not using Hadoop. Actually, we found that Hadoop and most kind of NoSQL solutions are not very good for kind of quantitative data when you need to aggregate and kind of go across these things. We're using Postgres actually as our database. We don't have a typical setup of it. Probably a pretty advanced one. But that's what we use underneath that. Then kind of the stack goes up, and it's fairly typical for web applications. When apart from that, so backend written in Python, all the data connectors and everything on the server side, Django, and then heavy JavaScript and HTML5 stuff on top of that. So the kind of secret sauces, or where we've spent most of our effort, is probably and the database model and the kind of the really low-level stuff, and then in making this really usable and like really approachable for end users at the top. So visualization, JavaScript, UI stuff.
Yeah, I'll kind of hop in from there. Very similar to data market. We're also not based on we're not based on Hadoop either. But I think that like data market, what makes our company special isn't necessarily the ability to process lots of data. It's to process a large amount of data very, very well. The secret sauce isn't in bulk. It's in the quality in which you do with it. So for us, our stack is essentially a relatively simple LAMP stack. It just happens to be, there are things you build on Apache like Solar that help us do smarter things. Obviously, we've optimized our PHP and MySQL stacks very, very well, but we're not necessarily built like a semantic big data company would be that needs to process hundreds of millions of rows like every day. It's really just, as we get into stuff from the leagues, whether it's NFL, NBA, whomever, it's really just once it's internalized, how we apply our mathematical data predictive modeling to it, and that doesn't necessarily require Hadoop or anything like that. It just requires a relatively simple stack that's done well.
And the predictive analytics part is done how? Using
What's that? I'm sorry.
The predictive analytics part.
Oh, yeah. That's done. One of the problems with being a seed stage company is that we don't have as much money to throw at engineering problems as possible. So I will be honest that it's somewhat jankily thrown together. It's done on one hand a lot of Python into R on one hand. Another part of it is actually done in Excel in a series of macros done by our chief analyst.
And that works.
Yeah.
In all honesty.
Yeah, and ours is a relatively simple stack as well, also Python, Postgres. We do have, and any more details on that, I'll turn over to Carl, who can talk further. Again, the big thing for us is with this expressions technology. I mean, that was really the we considered kind of our secret sauce and was a tough nut to crack, which is how to use NLP machine learning for this legal language, which, again, is this very verbose, kind of arcane language, and just made the data very, very, very hard to automate. And so developing that, we're working to kind of improve it all the time and to come up with new tags and new classifiers. But that's really what allows us to do the analysis that we do.
You want to get Carl to talk about the stack?
Sure. So the stack's actually simple. It's like Joss mentioned. I mean, we run Postgres at the bottom and then run Python on top of that. But I think the most interesting aspect is before it actually gets into the Postgres database, we're running a crawler that pulls in all the legal cases and events, and then running the natural language processing and machine learning techniques on top of that, and that lives in a Java environment because Java is the language of academic research still. So when we're collaborating with the professors from the Stanford Computer Science Department who have run these machine learning techniques and natural language processing techniques, they're doing it in a typical Java environment. And then we're bringing the product of those results into the Postgres database, which is then exposed to the website and typical web stack processes.
Our stuff actually do get in the way of a lot of data, and even the slightest little event or big event, Barack Obama goes to Burma, and dude, we get 100,000 mentions of those, and we actually have to sort of be able to pick them up in each document and actually go back and say, yeah, these all were the same event. That's sort of interesting, and so it's less of Hadoop. It's actually more of being able to do the linguistics on this that we've mostly done on our own, and then be able to store it. We've sort of gone through, I think, 5 iterations of the actual database. We're settling in to be pretty happy with Mongo, but it's sort of been pretty much everything else in between, I think. And then being able to both read very fast, or say write very fast to this as well, extract very fast, and be able to do interactive UIs to this, and which has been an interesting experience to me. With Spotfire, we were sort of always, can we do interactive graphics on 1 million rows? Or maybe got towards the 10 million rows sort of data set. And here the data set I probably should have shown you live, but we can now do sub-second, sub-500 milliseconds to 5-6 billions of rows of data in the cloud, which end up being pretty cool, in itself. Whether it really matters, but it's sort of geek cool at least. And then we do some Hadoop stuff for historical reprocessing, where we sort of upgrade our linguistics techniques, and maybe we need to go back and reprocess that. But it's less of Hadoop in real time, and a lot of Mongo for storage.
Great, thank you. So actually, let me start opening it up. If people have pushing this. Yep. Let me give you my mic. There should be another one floating around somewhere. Can you introduce yourself quickly? Just name and company.
Sure. Thanks, Matt. Tony Baer with Ovum. We're an IT analyst firm, and I have 2 questions, one for Chris and the other for Nick. For Chris, you mentioned before about that you wanted to avoid the situation of inventing a problem. And it sounds to me like for what you're doing, I mean, was this obviously a problem that your potential clients already identified, or did you have to do some missionary sell on that?
So we started off early on with some government customers who had very specific problems they needed to solve, and we could solve a very specific problem in terms of basically do patterns of life analysis of people, understanding bad guys over time, and do that off text. So it turns out there was a very specific problem that we could help out with. Then, we went out and built a big hammer and started thinking about all kinds of different things. And now we've sort of turned that back into a set of more solutions, if you want, for very specific problems around corporate security, cybersecurity, IP leakage, a whole set of applications where this turns out to be, again, go find somebody who has a problem, has a budget line item for that, and sell it, identify that person and sell it to them.
And for Nick, sports has always been a very data-driven, sort of business. And what you're doing is predictive analytics based on, what these guys or what these teams have done in various situations. And of course, I guess what I'm wondering is how crowded is your market? Because you look at things like fantasy football. That's all about kind of what you do. So how unique is it what you do, and how crowded was your market?
I think it's very unique. That's just me being very biased. A lot of the real high-end data analytics that are being done are sort of contained in very small silos. So like they're being done internally, let's say inside of the Yankees. But no one's really going after the consumer side of this market. And so like no one's helping somebody really go after fantasy or handicapping or things like that. There's a whole lot of people who can run a blog and say, oh, I think you should pick up this player or bet on this team or something like that. But there are very few people who are really applying really rigorous data analysis to what we're doing. And so, at the end of the day, it is pretty much, a relatively nascent space, but it's also a space that, at the end of the day, either you're better than your competitors or you're not. And so one of the things that we sort of market very heavily is, here's what we said, here's what ESPN said, here's what CBS said, here's who all of these people who you were trusting as industry leaders said, and here's how we're beating them, and here's how that translates into you winning your fantasy football league, or you doing this, you doing that. And so it's one of those things where there are a lot of people who are sort of taking similar approaches, but they're very siloed into being within one organization, or being just focused on one sport, and not really going after the biggest sector, which is the consumer side of the coin.
Nick, how you doing in fantasy football?
That's a fantastic question. Right now, I'm in 2 leagues. I'm in first and third. The very first year, I ran Number Fire, the models of Number Fire. Before that, I was like 6th and 7th. I never made the playoffs. The very first year, I won my league, and the last year, I won it again. And this year, like I said, first and third. It's really one of those things where the differences aren't going to be like wholesale. I mean, it's not going to like, you start using it and you beat everybody all the time. You're still subject to the same vagaries of injuries and weather and things like that. It's not like we're coming back from time and telling you who to start. But with fantasy football or any sort of incremental product, you get a point here, you get a point there. That may translate into 4 or 5 points over a given week of fantasy football, and that gives you an extra 10% win probability or 15% win probability. And over the season, that translates into 1 or 2 victories, which can be all the difference in the world.
We'll go this way, and then I'll come back over there.
Thanks. My name is Micah Jepson. I work for a firm called IIPLG. We do patent law. So my question, obviously, is for Lex McKenna. I'm interested to find out. It sounds like you have problems kind of with the natural language learning, and every day I'm writing claim language, which is unique to each claim or unique to each invention. And it sounds like, to me, you can write, for one invention, you can write it up in an infinite number of ways. So have you made progress in trying to kind of approach claim language itself? It sounds like you do analytics for the judge, kind of the disposition of the jurisdiction, kind of similar, some of the similar kind of facts in the case, but a lot of times litigation's won just on the claim language itself. So that's kind of my question.
Yeah, absolutely. It often is. And so what we do, so one thing when we go and get all these documents, part of our, the knowledge, part of our, kind of technology is knowing what to download and what not to download, because we basically crawl a government database and we pay the same 10 cents per page to download a document that anyone does. And so we have to know what's important and what's not important. But the stuff that we think is important, we download it and we're able to make all of that searchable. So what we do for claims is, so we're able to what's important for us is we're able to identify what a claim is, right? And then if you want to do searches, so we say, hey, you're finding a new patent in a certain space, and you want to look at claims for certain similar kinds of patents, we'd enable you to search for that, right? Or if you wanted to see search for every time that the word modem was construed in a certain claim, we allow you to search for that. So now you can see, okay, hey, it was construed 10 different times, and here's how the judges interpreted that word, right, or that term. So our solution there is just to make it available, make it searchable, so that you could find claims, compare claims, and then ultimately use them to improve what you do next time.
Great panel, by the way. I'm Tom Hughes from Multi-Capital. This is a question, I think, for all 4 of you. You're all in predictive businesses. How do you test the validity? How do you backtest the validity of your predictions? And is that a different problem for each of you?
I guess I'll just jump in first. Part of what we do, in the consumer space, to gain any credibility, you have to test, and you have to be able to prove that what you're doing is better than your competitors. So it's very contingent in our business to be able to test and display the results in a very transparent way. And one of the realities of it is, even if you're right 60% of the time or 65% of the time, you're going to be wrong 35% of the time as well. So, for us, it's very, very important to be as transparent. And the way we test is just, as each week happens, as each day happens, as we make predictions about players or games, once those events happen, we have another crawl that goes out, finds out what actually happened, compared it to what we predicted, and collate the deltas, compare it to our competitors. And yeah, I mean, one of our main strategies is just overwhelming transparency, because again, in the consumer space, no one has any reason to trust you wholesale. You got to be able to prove to them that you're better than X or Y, and by how much.
Yeah, I'd say that for us, I mean, kind of people consider the holy grail in our space is predictive analytics, right? Actually predicting outcomes. Right now, what we're doing is more it is on the prediction side. It's more of history. So we're more telling you percentages of what happened in the past. So we're not saying right now. Now you can use that. A lot of lawyers do that decision tree kind of analysis that Carl showed, and so but they kind of make it up in their head. Well, yeah, probably about 10% of the time that's gonna happen, or 20% of the time that happens. So what we can do now is provide real data to each of those nodes, and then they can do the calculation at the end.
For us, actually, so we don't do predictions, but we deal with a lot of predictions from others. So we have, in the macroeconomic space, there are, all sorts of people that make predictions about growth, inflation, and those kind of things. And the interesting thing about that is kind of, we also record reality as it comes in. So we have quite a lot of, we've been around in, collecting data in Iceland since 2008. And then kind of, all sorts of predictions are existing from then. They tend to vanish offline in time. But we've done some really interesting analysis of kind of how accurate the different parties are in predicting stuff. So we haven't exposed any of that, but what we intend to do with especially predictions, because we almost, for every prediction, we almost always have reality come in afterwards, so we know how they're doing. So we're going to expose that at some point to help people understand who's good at this and who's not. I guess like a follow-up question might be for the predictive guys, though. If you become like really, really good at what you do, won't people start using it to prevent it from ever happening? So if you kind of predict an attack somewhere, somebody will go in and actually prevent it from happening, and then you're wrong again. So.
It's a good question, and of course, having a name like Recorded Future, you're sort of exposing yourself to be hit on the face like that on this. So the way that we sort of think about this, that we're dealing with pretty hard problems here. You saw my mural of surprise. It's about arming the human to be smarter, not about any fantasies in our world of like saying, this is exactly going to happen versus this. So make the human analyst smarter instead of having the human read this much text, be able to actually turn it into data and be smarter. Now, there are ways that you can do things. So if you look at events that are 30 days out, like you actually have a chance of sort of checking with reality, you could say, look, here are protests that we're thinking are going to happen in India. Let's look at the, wait 30 days and go back and see which one actually happened. Now, there are political things, like somebody's protest is somebody else's peaceful demonstration is somebody else's, so there's vagaries of those sort of things. But you can look at, just go back and look at the events. Did they happen? You can say, maybe you're looking at geographic cities in India. You can actually, on particular dates, you could actually look at which one of these cities had a rise in Google search volume at that future time, or when that time point happened later. If it's a company you're involved with, you could look at the market volatility in that name at a future time point. We can actually go back and look at our own system. So if we think there's going to be a rise, or something is going to happen regarding a person, a product, or a place at a future time point, we can actually look at our own system later on and see whether news volume rose around that element at that future time point. So there's actually many different ways we can go at it. Now, I always make the point that some events are highly repeatable, and then you can do a lot of these sort of things. So if you watch gold price, maybe the good news would be that you have sort of an ongoing piece going on that you could look at. The downside is that you have a lot of people trying to figure out what the gold price is. All the way around, you go to, when will Iran have a nuclear weapon? Presumably they never had a nuclear weapon. So now, are you going to sort of automate, some outcome analysis of that? No, you won't. But maybe you can help the analyst who's trying to figure that out.
Hi, my name's Aaron Franco. I'm with ClickSlide. I have a question for Josh, or perhaps your colleague. I'm wondering about your expressive language that you spoke about, and I'm a little bit familiar with that area of technology, and I know that you have to make some generalizations when dealing with that, and there's some generalizations that you would like to make, but perhaps you're unable to make. And I was just wondering if you could speak about some of the roadblocks that you've faced in developing this language and creating its extensibility.
Yeah, I mean, you make up a good point. So one of the things that's interesting about legal language is that in the end, what it's supposed to do is convey something very precise, right? There is actually an outcome. There is actually a rule that needs to be applied one way or the other. So on the one hand, it is applicable to actually a structured way of parsing out the language. You have to convey certain terms certain ways. But you're absolutely right. On the other hand, because legal decisions are expressed in natural language, there are a multitude of different ways of getting at particular points. So one of the things that we've done on top of expressions, which is, at its core is parsing natural language, is look at other clues that could inform, what a legal opinion is likely to be. So, for example, if we're trying to parse a case and extract various pieces of information, and we're having trouble with a particular piece, we can bring in another clue, such as how did a case that cited this particular case make its decision differently based on what we brought out of the previous case, right? Because these don't exist in a vacuum. There are clues. There are cases that cite other cases. There are rules that change based on cases. And if we can bring in that other peripheral data, each time we run into a roadblock, it gives us particular clues. But you're absolutely right. There are sometimes that we're going to run into unsolvable problems, and that's why we assign confidence intervals to every decision that we make. And in the rare case where the machine is basically not confident at all what the outcome is trying to get is, we can flag that and we can review it on an on-demand basis.
Hi, this is Andrew Brook from Celerity, and we're involved in the real-time space. And real-time is one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot and has a lot of different meanings, from hours and minutes on one end to milliseconds and microseconds on the other. I'm interested really in two things, and this really I think applies to all four of you. To what extent is real-time important to the vertical that you're in, and how do you define real-time?
It's probably easiest for us all. For us, it's daily. So it's we go out and crawl daily, and that's important to our customers. But that's adequate. Sort of real time for us. These guys probably have different.
Yeah, I'd say real time for us is maybe not the most critical thing, but it's an important facet of our business for sure. Anyone who's ever watching a sporting event, there are an infinite number of interesting tidbits that can happen in real time. And if you're watching the game, like I said before in my presentation, how cool would it be just to say, like, in this formation, the Giants are 37.5% likely to pass to the right, or at this juncture in the game, the Giants are 42% likely to win the game, or to have a field goal at the end of this drive. And that's something that from our perspective, at least from our side of the coin, is actually there. The hard part is just getting the pipes into the networks and getting the buy-in from the people who run the networks to get that information across and screen real estate, different things like that. So real time to us is probably defined in seconds. The calculations themselves are probably relatively instantaneous. The transmission, the data latency to get those informations through whatever boxes that NBC or whomever would want them will probably be in the seconds or something like that.
Yeah, for us, one of the probably thousands of definitions of big data that I've heard is that the big data is the three V's. It's the velocity, volume, and variety of the data that you're working with. And we're actually more about the variety and the volume than necessarily about the velocity. So the thing is that with so what I'm saying is not very real time. In our space, in kind of quantitative information, there are the financial markets are the space for real-time data, and they're being served pretty well by the likes of Bloomberg. And so, that's not the field we're going after. But in terms of kind of macroeconomic data, market intelligence, and things like that, I would say most things happen on a daily basis. So that's, we have quite a lot of stuff on daily granularity. We have some hourly granularity data as well. And kind of the system is set up to be able to handle things down to maybe 5 minutes after the fact. But in terms of caching and stuff like that, because there are other technological problems that come in if you go for real time. So we're set up to deal with data that updates every 5 minutes or so. But for us, real time, the statistics that come out, the end of day market prices, the different market intelligence reports, official statistics, and so on, happen mainly on a daily basis. But often it actually matters when in the day it is, because at the end of at the market closure, the job statistics come out, something like that. So we need to have that in our system right away, but not like continuously updating it.
So technologically, we'll pick up tweets and SEC filings, and I think we can claim these days sort of be down to seconds of processing things through, not microseconds, so not like a complete sort of Chicago style, if I put it that way, but so seconds to minutes sort of thing. It depends on the sources that we go after and so on. But the high priority ones will put on that sort of pace. Now, it doesn't mean that all use cases. We have very prominent companies who use our product to go back and look at rumors over the last 2 years and match that with an internal data set. They're in analytical mode, and they might spend months on that. They're sort of in the legal world of things. Then we have other customers, one very prominent company right now that is terrified about something that's going to unfold over the next 7 days. And they have real-time screens up in big operations centers with our data just sort of unfolding in front of them to see if bad things happen. So then real-time. Now, it's not, again, that sort of microsecond real-time, but it's plenty real-time, I guess I'd call it.
Hi, my name is Angad. I'm a recent graduate, so not working with any firm as such. But my question was for all of you. Is there, obviously you guys are trying to tackle these problems because there's already an inefficiency in the status quo. But are people sort of having problems with you guys bringing in that efficiency? So for example, with Nick's case, are pundits sort of being like, okay, this guy is just coming in with these numbers and sort of invading our space, something like what Nate Silver recently experienced, or with Josh, for example. I think you said that for a law firm, for example, they want to get the case, but for corporates, they want to avoid litigation. So is there like sort of conflict of interest over there, or do you guys, I can't think of examples for the two of you, but do you feel that, is that a problem you're facing? That people don't want you to make this better because the status quo is just profitable to them.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely times where, we would have a discussion with, a certain company or a certain league or something like that, and they'd make the intonation that, sports aren't played in laboratories, not played on laptops inside of code, they're played on the field. And, there's no way to model this intangible process that is the game. So there's definitely times where, we'll work with a certain writer who is sort of less interested in using our data and understanding the reasoning behind it, and just because they're, opinion-based. They're like, I don't need I don't need a computer to tell me that the Steelers are a good team. I can see with my own eyes. And while we would make the argument that your eyes can deceive you for a variety of reasons, and I would also make the argument that, over time, I'd say that reticence has slowly dissipated. But sure, I think there's always going to be a little bit of hesitation, particularly in fields, like sports or probably like law, which is sort of old boys clubs. Things move at a slow pace, and sort of the intransigence of people to make changes, causes them to be a little wary of new technologies. But I certainly don't think it's as difficult to make a dent in the marketplace as it would have been 5 or 10 years ago, for sure.
It's a good question. But all the questions are great. That's a good question. It does play out in our space in a couple of ways. One is we talk about how lawyers can use the data now to market to potential clients when they're putting together a pitch deck. It's now very easy for them to figure out, hey, tendencies of a certain judge or a certain district, or even how their law firm, it might have been hard to gather who knows this judge well. They can now get lots of data and how their law firm has done. But now corporations can also use it to pick their lawyers. So that's information that they probably didn't have. So now they know, for example, how busy you are. They can say, hey, I see you've got 10 open cases right now. Can you really give me the attention that I need? Or they can say, hey, what happened? This recent case you lost. Tell me about it. What happened? People have pushed us, where there's some interest in us going the next step and actually rating lawyers, for example. Someone's even proposed a fantasy league of sorts.
Fantasy lawyers? God forbid.
I'll call you afterwards. And we haven't taken that step, but that's another an area that would generate lots of debate and discussion.
For us, I think that's a great question. And for us, it's many times the person who just have very, very deep domain knowledge. So I spoke to one of my colleagues in Europe this morning who had been sort of in seeing people at this intelligence agency, it doesn't matter, but whatever. And they start asking him questions about cities in Russia that is completely incomprehensible. What do you say? You can't pronounce them, at least, no, and you certainly can't write them down. And then they start, look, I know that this is going to happen the 24th of November here. Where are you on that? And da-da-da. So you sort of, people who just have deep, deep domain knowledge. But it goes back to where you say, look, we can help you ask questions, new questions around your data. We can help you sort of challenge the sort of assumptions that you have. What is going to happen when you retire? Can we help you actually capture some of the practices that you do and actually package that for the young guys? We build out like 10 different arguments why even for that person we can be meaningful.
Yeah, for us, actually we talk to basically two types of people. People that are consuming the data that we distribute and the people that are distributing it. So when we're talking to people that are consuming the data, they tend to love us because it brings efficiencies into problems that they are themselves having, doing their own job. So it makes themselves more efficient. It's not like making somebody redundant that they, they don't feel like it's making them redundant. It's making them better. On the production side, however. We've found it's impossible to sell this to research organizations on the merits that it will save work internally. We have to make the argument that it will bring in more revenue, and I think that maybe goes to say that the analysts actually have quite a lot of time to work on different things there. At least that seems to be what the management thinks. So.
Hi, I'm Grant Case. I'm with Citibank. I guess Chris kind of alluded to it earlier, and you've all hit upon it. But how are you finding your customers, or to flip the question, how are your customers finding you? Because you all are sitting inside verticals, you're niche players inside those particular verticals. So are you having to do a lot of proactive going out and in forums like this and others, or is it more you're doing something very interesting, and that they're finding you for that particular skill set?
Yeah, I think in my case, it's a little more the latter. One of the things about our business is that we have a lot of B2B deals with companies like ESPN, with Bleacher Report, SB Nation. And as a consumer company, sometimes it's hard to get the credibility in the marketplace. So when you work with an ESPN, your name gets attached to ESPN and their sizable market cash. And so when people see you're working with ESPN, that applies a level of sort of second level credibility, such that they'll go seek you as a function of those relationships. And it's also true that because we're a consumer-based company, we do a lot of social media outreach, and being transparent about our results and how accurate they are also helps with that. So yeah, for us it's probably a little more of the former, but the latter, excuse me. But the former is also important too. It's also it's always good to be visible as a company, to go out to things like this and interface with the audience. And yeah.
We take sort of two approaches to it. One is direct by means. Ultimately what we do is sort of targeted at companies. We'll go seek those out, but we want to win the end users. And it actually turns out that the content that we sort of generate from our analysis turns out to be pretty SEOable at some nice level. So we produce content that ends up being, we actually are starting to have our end users produce such content as well, and that drives nice inbound traffic that sort of gets into a funnel, and leads come out. Simplifying a little bit, but so it's a combination of inbound and outbound.
For us, actually, this is a very interesting question. So we started out with the notion, we're gonna build this platform where people could search for data, and we figured it would spread quite virally because people would be looking for it. So we were going after big volume, low-priced solutions. We got registered users in our systems are in the low kind of tens of thousands. So it's a decent audience, but it's not kind of the audience that we were going after with that model. But then it turns out that when we're speaking to the right people, we can sell our solution for a lot of money. So after a couple of years the other day, it came out like this. We had a hard time giving our solution away, but then it turns out we can sell it for a lot of money if we sit down with the right people.
So I'd say, for us, I'd say three things. One is we do, in our IP, we do have a good brand name because we have one of the top IP academics, Mark Lemley, who's really the founder, the original researcher at Stanford, and kind of the founder. So that's been helpful. But I will say, secondly, like any startup, right, sales and marketing is the last thing that happens. You really focus on the product. And so that's a goal we're raising around early next year. That'd be the goal, to really build out sales and marketing. But it is an issue. For example, in New York, we just haven't. We don't know folks in New York. We haven't had anyone stationed here, so we haven't really talked to a lot of folks here. And that's an important part of the next step, really, for us.
Yeah, one thing I can just hop in real quick. Something similar to my company, also Chris's company as well, is the time sensitivity of our information. In the sports world, things change on a daily basis: injuries, weather, roster transactions, and so we can be very relevant on the information very, very quickly, which allows us to kind of be on top of news and deliver interesting insights about those news very, very quickly. And so that's only not only is that SEOable, but it's also in terms of ESPN. They asked us specifically, well, what happened? What's the effect of Peyton Manning getting traded from the Colts to the Broncos? How does that affect the Colts? How does that affect the Broncos? That's the kind of information that is instantly viral, instantly social, instantly shareable. That's information that everybody wants to know. And events like that happen on almost a day-to-day basis in sports. So it allows us to be very quick and proactive, and that allows us to be very go after consumers very, very easily.
I think that's cool because that's where sort of big data can sort of like actually play a role on the actual marketing side of things in a good way. We much more narrow, but when this Saudi Aramco had this major cyber attack that took out 15,000 computers recently, probably only a few of you who read about that, sort of geeky me again, but that happened, and we did an analysis of sort of what happened, put that out, and put in some good work into it, 12 hours, whatever, afterwards. Mr. Kaspersky in Moscow picks that up, tweets it to his followers and says, outstanding analysis, gets to 100,000, whatever sort of cyber guys, and da-da-da-da-da. So you can do pretty amazing things, actually, when you turn it on its head and go that way.
Yeah, I'd say there's a nice thing about being a data company, because you can use it. Yesterday we met with Wall Street Journal reporter and said, hey, here's the kind of data that we can come up, most litigated patents, or who's the most sued the most, is the stuff you'd be interested in writing about. And then also you can use the data to find customers, because we know, who has the most lawsuits right now, right? Who's, which law firms are the busiest. So you can use the data itself to find customers.
We do exactly that as well. We look for companies who have lots of trouble on the
Hi, I'm Michael Selleck. I'm an independent data science consultant. Halmar, I guess this is mostly for you, but everybody else as well. So you mentioned it's you all mentioned that you go after problems that are already expressed, not trying to invent problems. But it's a question and more about estimating value. So it's hard to sell efficiency, very easy to sell increased revenue. But when it's a very vague, you will find new insights, how do you estimate what revenue you're going to create for your customers?
Right. A very good question. So actually, I mean, we only vaguely kind of, we only mention the kind of increased, you will find data that you wouldn't otherwise have found. I mean, that, everybody knows it's, it's probably true, but it's, it's something you can't put a monetary value, an explicit monetary value on. What we try to sell them on is, you have, so a typical scenario, and now I'm kind of talking on the data consumption side of things. Typical scenario, a large company probably subscribes to market intelligence from 10 different research organizations. On top of that, they have statistical data coming in and kind of all sorts of decision data into their corporate strategy group or corporate intelligence group or whatever they call that part of the organization. And in the good ones, they have a networked drive where there are Excel files and PDFs and PowerPoints and so on. No way to search it. There's usually this one or two guys that everybody calls if they need some information, and they pretty much have it in their head. You can actually sell it. You can sell it on that. That wouldn't it be great if you actually had all the information that you're taking in. If you had that at your fingertips, even in a decision-making meeting, imagine kind of imagine the dynamics in a meeting where a big decision is coming up and the CEO all of a sudden asks questions. So, yeah, good job, guys, but what does this market look like for women or something like that? And the typical answer to that will be, well, I don't know. Let's reconvene. Let's ask research and reconvene in a week, and make the decision there. If you can sell them on, you can bring this data up. As in almost like slide-like format right here in that meeting. That's kind of what people buy. So I guess what I'm saying is that for to some extent people buy it on intangible value, but where we kind of go specific is that we also find, especially in larger organizations, that there's quite a lot of redundancies in the different research that different parts of the organization has been buying, and the different projects that they're having done for them, and these can easily run in the hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. Just eliminating that fact.
I think it's a great question that I feel like I've wrestled with my whole life. Having done those sort of things, it's depressing. But maybe good. I think what it comes down to is that if you're going to go after doing true value pricing on data analysis, you have to pick one very narrow domain and do that exceedingly well. So maybe in sports statistics, you could actually do it and actually say, I want to have part of the outcome. To do horizontal analytical tools, horizontal big data tools, and actually be able to do value pricing in various segments, don't even try starting. It's a complete, utter waste of time. So, it's a nice, decisive answer for you.
So how do you price? So you price based on your perception of the value?
Yeah, I think that what I always argue with these sort of things, you can price lots of different ways. We, charge various sort of ways, but users, servers, whatever it now may be that you price, but you use the value pricing as part of motivating why they should spend the money. But to actually do your price list based on the value provided, dude, if you are in the, you come into a chemical plant and say, look, I want X% of whatever improvement I do, or, if I come into the semiconductor manufacturing thing and I'll take your yield from 80.2 to 80.4% and I want, X. I've sold in those environments. I've sort of valued my software based on that. It's fantastic. And I've gotten humongous POs out of that. But to actually get that percentage, even just, what do you do year 2? It's easy year 1, but what do you do year 2? Do you have a clawback if it goes down? These people, this is sort of MBA stuff where people sit in MBA school and invent and think it's a great thing to do, but in reality, I don't think it's as real. So,
any MBA students out there?
Say that again.
I'm sorry, I thought you were going to say something. No, you good? Okay. Next, maybe one or two more. You already asked one stuff. It's cool. Nothing personal.
Great, thank you. My name is Joe Galarno. I'm with Newsright here in New York. It's interesting we're meeting here in Bloomberg, which makes $7 billion a year off of intellectual property and protecting that property. A lot of you folks mentioned that that your data comes from elsewhere. Some folks mentioned that they pay for this data. I was wondering, how does the intellectual property rights of what you're acquiring and what you're munging and resyndicating affect your business model? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I guess I'll just jump in. The data we get is public domain. The leagues themselves, the NFL, Major League Baseball, the NCAA as an organization, they supply that data for free, sort of under the Facebook model that if we give them information and people build things off of it, it can only create value for the organizations themselves. So as far as the information we're getting in, we're getting the same information that ESPN gets, anyone else gets. As far as the repackaging of information, we don't necessarily sell basic information. We sell the predictive analytics based off of the information we got in. So I was answering your question as I understood it.
Yeah, no, I guess you have public domain stuff that you're processing.
Right, yeah. I mean, yeah.
We process all sorts of text following religiously robots.txt. So if robots.txt sort of hold us back, then we don't go there. Otherwise, we process the text, extract events, extract time, throw away the text, keep the events that we've processed out of the text.
I mean, same here. We actually started building our library or collection of data of the largest open and free data sources what we could find out there. So World Bank, UN, IMF, and these guys, they all have pretty explicit open licenses. So we technically don't need to talk to them, but we still have connections there. Then we've kind of been going into licensing more proprietary data and getting reseller agreements. But you won't find any data on any of our solutions that we don't have an explicit license for. I might actually kind of want to add, challenge kind of the premise of the question, though, because if you look at Bloomberg, for example, yes, they have proprietary databases that they've created, but what they create those databases out of is, a lot of it is actually data that comes from elsewhere, from public sources and from the markets and elsewhere. So it's maybe similar for some of us here.
Yeah, I'd say that for us, there is a movement in law and in governments to make this data available. So various jurisdictions have passed laws saying, hey, you have to put cases online. That's the only reason this is possible. And in fact, that's part of really this project started at Stanford to create openness and transparency around the whole crazy IP litigation area. So actually, we still offer our data is free to IP academics, to judges themselves who use it, as well as government agencies. So that's a big part of our mission. But when it gets into state, there's other stuff, there's stuff that's still not available that we hope to be able to get, down the road, as well as settlement data is something that some of our clients have said, hey, if we share this, can you anonymize it? That's sort of different. But most of the stuff is public data.
All right, two more. Last two. Hi, my name is Ihab. I work for a company called Purelator. Guys, I'm going to kick it back to the technology. What excites you when it comes to new technologies? And I guess, how do you see your stacks or technologies evolving in the next few months or maybe few years?
That's an easy one for me. Where I see the most excitement is in the visualization part of things. We've gone with, essentially, our visualizations are very much geared towards kind of charts and being, doing the basic things and doing them really, really well. We've had to go with a library just in order to kind of support older browsers. We've had to go with libraries that aren't necessarily the very cutting edge out there. So for me, for example, for the technical guys in the room, moving from Protovis, which is what we've built our stuff on and made compatible to Internet Explorer 7 and 8, which is about 20% of the business traffic on the web still, to D3 in probably a couple of years when the market share of these browsers is down to 3-4%, hopefully. That's kind of the big shift that I see. So it's on the front end, it's in the visualization.
Yeah, it's actually an easy one for me too. One of the biggest sort of like recent trends in sports is just capturing as much data as possible through RFID sensors and things like that. So you can imagine a future maybe 3 or 4 years from now where each player, the ball itself, is connected to this data source. And so you're collecting information in the XYZ space of every player, how they move constantly throughout a course of a game. So from a scouting perspective, from a play call perspective, from a logistics perspective of a team, having that information, be able to translate it and understand it and why a play didn't work or why a play did work and things like that, that gives you a tremendous advantage. So the teams that are proactive in understanding that information, but also proactive in creating the technology to obtain that information, and it's just it's going to be ridiculous once somebody gets it right.
Yeah. Well, first of all, a great question. I'm interested to hear from any of you. If you have thoughts for us, as well as any other general thoughts on our business. But I'm very curious to hear what Carl has to say on this.
So I kind of break down the answer to this question into two aspects. So one is on the back end. So on the slide that I showed at the very first part of my talk, we talked about the map of patent litigation and litigation generally. One of the things that we spend a lot of time in our R&D development is discovering those links in the map that are non-trivial. So, links between cases that, are not obvious, and we spend a lot of time doing that, and that helps people ask questions, or answer questions rather, such as, I'll give an obvious one. Should I go into the mobile space? Is there a lot of patent litigation there? Obviously, the answer is yes. And to help discover those links that aren't necessarily obvious helps people make not just legal decisions, but business decisions as well. And the second aspect, not to steal what everyone else said, but on the visualization side, it's a fascinating thing for us because if you want to know where the very small population of people that still run IE6 is, they're in law firms. That's where they are. So, we have a lot of really interesting things that we can do with the visualizations. You can show maps of how a case laid out. You can show linkages between cases. You can do all sorts of fun stuff. But, our clients are unable to view that at this time. So, it would be great if they'd all download Chrome or even IE8. That'd be great. But, it's an interesting challenge.
I'll give you some pointers.
For us, as I mentioned before, this idea of being able to ask questions in, what CEOs are being turned over within the next 12 months in half a second. We spent a lot of time making that happen. And now that sort of it allows us to build sort of a whole different level of user experiences. We did do the D3 move here, as we hear, and just said screw it, and IE9 or just nothing older than that. And that was a big sort of gutsy move to make, and just say we're going to run with that. That felt great. The other piece is that we want to have people actually produce what we call analytic product, like the full, not just the visualization, but produce the whole report, the whole product in our system, and make that sort of available on a tablet, and just really be the experience for exploring data and once it's actually put together. And we think that's going to be pretty cool.
Great. So that was actually a great forward-looking question. I think it's a great way to end. It's almost 8 o'clock. I think it's time for us to go drink. Why don't you join me in thanking all our great panelists today. And I'll see you guys on December 18, which is the next one right before the holiday, for those who are courageous.